On this channel, I've always been very complimentary about the Sony APS-C line of cameras, but after having shot with only Sony APS-C cameras for the last 2.5 years, do I miss the full frame system, or am I really happy with these? Today I've come up with a pros and cons list to decide whether it makes sense to go to APS-C or to stick with full frame cameras. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So if we start with the negatives, and eventually we will get to all of the pro points that I think make the APS-C cameras definitely worth considering in 2025. So one of the main arguments that a lot of photographers have for shooting with a full frame camera is the fact that there will be a lot more options for a higher resolution. So whereas this Sony a6700 can only shoot in 26 megapixels, the Sony A7R line, for example, can shoot 61 megapixels, and even when you put it into crop mode, it crops down to 26 megapixels. So that's a really cool feature. It means that you can get basically a crop sensor out of that full frame sensor. And obviously those full frame sensors are going to be so much bigger, meaning they can draw in a lot more light for shooting at nighttime. One of the other things that's worth bearing in mind is the fact that the Sony a7R III images that I was shooting with before I went to the a6700, those images were just lovely and contrasty, straight out of camera. I loved editing them. I felt like they always looked very natural. Whereas with these, there is a little bit more of an editing process, and often when you're shooting in less favorable conditions, maybe it's a bit hazy, or maybe it's just a bit of a grey, boring day, then sometimes the images that come out of this camera can look a little bit, maybe just a little bit like they need a bit more editing, really. Another negative with the Sony a6700 being the top of the line APS-C camera for Sony, it still is lagging behind the Sony full frame cameras in terms of technological advancements. This will always be a step behind. So for example, it doesn't have the latest and greatest flippy screen, it won't be able to shoot as many frames per second, it won't have as good image stabilization and things like that. So there are things to bear in mind when you're shooting with an APS-C camera compared to the full frame camera when it comes to technological advancements. Another thing that a lot of people will mention is the fact that the Sony APS-C line only has one card slot. So that means if you forget your card, as it appears I've done today, or you maybe accidentally write over your images or something like that, then you haven't got a backup. But obviously those things are completely user error. So if you just make sure you don't make those mistakes in the first place, you make sure you've always got backup cards in your bag, and you make sure you're not deleting your images before you're saving all of the ones that you want to get off the card, then you're not going to have a problem there, really, are you? When you shoot with a smaller sensor size, like a crop sensor camera like this, obviously background blur is going to be a bit more difficult to achieve with a lot of the lenses that you're using, whereas a lot of portrait photographers will automatically use a full frame camera and lens because you can really get your backgrounds to be much more blurry. But because I only shoot landscape and nature photography primarily, I'm not really bothered about the fact that it isn't getting as out of focus backgrounds. And there are portrait lenses, so this is a Sigma 30mm 1.4 that is really capable in terms of if I do want to get a nice out of focus background and a portrait of someone, I can shoot with this nice little lens here. So when it comes to lens selection for the APS-C line, this is a bit of a negative and a positive, so just hear me out on this one. But essentially the amount of lenses that you can find for the Sony crop sensor system is going to be about half of what you can get for the Sony full frame system. That's the simple fact. The full frame system has way more lenses being made, and basically you're out of luck in certain scenarios in terms of, like, I really love shooting macro when it gets to autumn. I love shooting fungi pictures, and I would love for there to be a lovely small little macro lens that I can put on my small little camera. And there are little macro lenses, but they're all manual focus for some reason. So if I want a really good quality macro lens for this, I'm going to have to get a bigger full frame macro lens just to make things work, because I love shooting with the focus bracketing mode for fungi photography. It means that I can get everything that I want in focus in the frame, and with a macro lens I just can't do that. But then you have got lenses like this one here. So this is the Tamron 18 to 300mm f3.5 to 6.3. And did you hear that? That is 18 to 300mm. So in full frame terms, that would be a 28 to 450mm focal range within one lens. And yes, it is quite big and bulky compared to a lot of other APS-C lenses, but it's basically all of your lenses in one. So it zooms out like so, but it is all of your lenses. So really and truly, for about 90% of my photos, I'm just using this one lens. And then if I want to maybe shoot a wide angle lens, I've got my little Sony 11mm here. And if I want to hike up a mountain, like, look at how small and compact that is. You just wouldn't get that same form factor with a full frame sensor. Yes, there are cameras like the Sony A7C line, which are basically the same sort of size as this. They're slightly heavier, but in terms of size, they use the same body basically. So there's not much difference between the two. But then when it comes to lenses, as I say, you just won't get a 1.8 wide angle lens that is that small for the full frame system. And you just won't get all of your focal ranges, like a super zoom, that is the same size as this. It will be quite a bit bigger, quite a bit bulkier. So for all of the hiking that I'm doing, I need everything to be as low weight as possible, really, within reason. Obviously, I am taking a decent sized camera and everything on a hike, so I know I'm not as ultralight as I could be, but for the most part, this is as ultralight as I really can get at the moment. And then the final thing to say, which I think sums things up very well, is if I'm hiking up a mountain and I'm there for sunset, I've got a beautiful scene in front of me and I'm shooting most of my photos with the Sony A6700, and I've got this locked down on a tripod, I've got my flippy screen, everything's looking lovely, and then I've got my A6400 as well if I want to do video, or I maybe want to do some telephoto shots while I'm waiting for sunset. I feel very grateful to be able to use these cameras, and I feel like they are very, very good, capable cameras. So I'm not there thinking, oh, wish I had full frame though. You know, for the most part, these are really good. And I actually think to myself, you know what, I don't want to carry all of that weight up the mountain. It's not worth it. I've got these great cameras in front of me and I'm enjoying using them. I don't need to go full frame. And that's the way I see things. The weight savings and the price savings to a certain degree, they make up for any of those negatives, and any of those wants to have a full frame camera are put to the back of my mind. But I really want to know what you guys think. So what works for you? Do you prefer the weight savings and price savings of an APS-C camera, or do you think it is worth paying that extra money and taking those extra lenses and things like that? Is that worth it with a full frame camera? I really want to know from you guys, because to be honest, it's been a couple of years since I've used a full frame camera, so I kind of don't remember what it was like to a certain degree. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts and your feelings on APS-C versus full frame. And obviously you've got different sensor sizes as well, so if any of you shoot with a micro four thirds camera, I'd be really interested to hear about that as well. So drop me a comment down below. I will read it and I will respond. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. And thank you everyone. If you haven't already subscribed and you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I will catch you guys on the next one. Thank you. Bye.